So, for years, superhero movies have been more in the business of taking inspiration from comic books instead of outright adapting them. And for the most part, I've enjoyed that approach. It's led to some of my favorite movies ever made. But with James Gunn's DCU growing more and more, and Supergirl being an adaptation of the Woman of Tomorrow miniseries from 2021, it got me thinking. DC Comics has so many amazing stories, but specifically a lot of miniseries and graphic novels, things that are completely standalone and could work perfectly in a movie format. And because the DCU is focusing more on standalone movies right now, I think there's a real opportunity to mix in some more of those direct adaptations like Supergirl alongside other projects, to expand the world with individual characters and to put a spotlight on their stories for new readers. So these are some comics that I think should get adapted in the DCU. Starting with a little bit of an unknown, kind of an underrated masterpiece, I'm not sure if you've even heard of it, and that's a little book called Watchmen. Grab your shovels, boys, because we're digging this one back up again. I'm going to be talking specifically about graphic novels and miniseries here, which is a comic that's designed to run for a set number of issues and then end. Some are 6 issues, some are 12, hell, some are only 3, as opposed to what's called an ongoing, which is a book that continuously runs theoretically forever, which at this rate, that's just gonna be Batman. There are a ton of ongoing comics that deserve a spotlight and can and should absolutely be an inspiration for the DCU, but I'm a sucker for these singular experiences that these kinds of miniseries allow, with a beginning, middle, and decisive end that isn't always guaranteed with ongoings. So for this video, I want to focus on those standalone stories that can easily fit in the format of a movie, in the same way that a traditional novel would get adapted. The first book that should get adapted into the DCU is Aquaman Andromeda by Ram V and Christian Ward from 2022. The book follows the crew of a submarine called the Andromeda, who are sent to Point Nemo, a spaceship graveyard deep in the Pacific Ocean. This draws Aquaman and even Black Manta to investigate, where they learn that there's something dark and terrifying deep beneath the surface. This book is, above all else, a horror comic. It takes Aquaman and forces him to confront these cosmic ideas and plays with the idea of thalassophobia, which is the fear of the open ocean. And interestingly, the similarities between the sea and deep space, this idea that the ocean, just like the empty void of space, is this vast sea of darkness that we'll never truly understand, and to gaze into it for too long is enough to drive anyone insane. Arthur in this book is still the classic Aquaman that we know and love, but he has this air of mystery to him. Like he's more of a myth than a superhero. The people of the Andromeda don't even think he exists until he shows up. By the time the story starts, Aquaman has essentially abandoned his human life as Arthur Curry. His classic orange armor is covered in coral and barnacles, and he feels like a guy that's been living in the deep sea for years upon years. And it could be a really cool way to introduce the character in this universe. There's also this really cool thing that the book does with the crew. There are these like little vignettes for some of them that showcase these horrific things that happen to them relating to the ocean. The first Aquaman movie made like $1 bajillion at the box office, and as much as I really love Jason Momoa being cast as Lobo and Supergirl, part of me is gonna miss him a little bit as Aquaman just because it was so against type for him. But regardless, because it was such a huge hit, I can't imagine the DCU would ignore the King of Atlantis for too long, and an adaptation of Andromeda could be a way to differentiate from those original James Wan movies. Hell, you could have him come back to produce or even direct and lean even further into those horror sensibilities than he could before. It's what's so exciting about Clayface, how that movie looks like a legitimate horror movie instead of the superhero movie with some horror ideas that we've seen so many times. Seriously, you could take the title and the DC logo off the poster and I would think that this is the next Obsession, which is a very good thing. That's the kind of thing we should be doing more of. The next book that could get adapted into the DCU is Zatanna, Bring Down the House by Mariko Tamaki and Javier Rodriguez from 2024. The book follows Zatanna Zatara, one of the most powerful magic users in the entire DC universe, running a third-rate magic show in Vegas. But in this story, because of something traumatic that happened when she was a kid, she very intentionally does not use any magic in her act, just the standard card tricks and illusions. She won't even say the word magic or refer to herself as a magician in her show, until one day magic starts to creep back into her life and a demon invades her show, and she has to embrace her magical heritage. All the while, you have all these different people from all over the magical side of DC telling her who and what she's supposed to be, and not letting her make those decisions for herself. The art in this book is gorgeous. You might know Javier Rodriguez from his other work on Absolute Martian Manhunter, which is equally as colorful and trippy. So if it were to be adapted in live action, it might have the same issues as Supergirl, not being nearly as colorful as its comic counterpart. I still think that the movie looks great, but Bocas Evely's art is such a defining identity for that book, especially with the color, so it's kind of disappointing that that doesn't seem to be as much of a priority for the movie, which is why this book might be better off in the medium of animation. I mean, let's be real, every comic book movie would be better if it was animated. It comes free with your being a drawing, but I still think that this story is such a great introduction to Zatanna, and it gives her such a clear character journey of hiding from her powers and overcoming her personal trauma. She's one of my favorite characters in all of DC, and outside of a few supporting roles here and there, she's never gotten a solo adaptation before, but also she works so well as a gateway to the greater magic corner of DC. The magical side of DC, like Zatanna, Deadman, the Justice League Dark, even Detective Chimp, is such a goldmine of untapped potential that's never really been touched in live action aside from the Constantine show and movie. And a solo standalone Zatanna movie that serves as an introduction to her character but also other magic users could really forge the mystical side of DC as its own section of the world. Also, do whatever it takes to get these bunnies in a movie, goddammit, I love these guys. Before we move on, this video is brought to you by Whatnot. Whatnot is the #1 live streaming shopping app where you can buy, sell, or auction things like comics, movies, toys, trading cards, or whatever other kind of collectible suits your hobbies and interests. For me, if you didn't already realize this, that would be mostly comics. Basically on Whatnot, sellers host live shows that you can scroll through where you can watch items come up in real time and browse what they have available and buy directly through the app. You get to see exactly what it is you're buying in someone's hands, ask questions, and you end up building kind of a relationship with the seller. Right now, Whatnot is offering $15 off your first purchase anywhere on the app, which on its own could be the cost of a comic or an action figures or even a trade or take a chunk out of an omnibus. I tried it out for myself and went through a few live shows, and I ended up getting a really fun haul. I got issue 4 of the new Punisher run. I also got this issue of Usagi Yojimbo Kaito 84 by Zach Rosenberg and Jared Cullum. I managed to get this variant of Web of Venom number 1 by Jordan Morris, Luke Ross, and Ramon Rosales with cover art by Juan Ferreira. I'm not reading Venom. I don't know what's going on with that, but the cover art is really cool, so I liked it. Probably the most exciting thing to me personally is I got this graded edition of Green Lantern Green Arrow number 76 by Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams from 1970, which if you know anything about me, is a very big deal to me. And it's only possible because of Whatnot that I was able to find this at such a good price. Use my link down below or scan the QR code on screen to get $15 off your first purchase on Whatnot anywhere in the app. Thanks again to Whatnot for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons and channel members who help make these videos possible starting at just $1 a month. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, the bunnies! Which is why the next book is We 3 by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely from 2004. I hadn't actually heard of We 3 until very recently when it was added to the DC Compact line, which has been one of my favorite things that DC's done in the past decade. The book is about a dog, a cat, and a rabbit who are kidnapped and turned into cybernetic weapons by the government before the project is deemed too unstable and shut down. Before they can be decommissioned, they escape, and the rest of the story is these 3 animals trying to get back home. It's this very sad depiction of creatures who were never meant to understand violence being forced to become weapons for the military. They're just animals who don't have any understanding of what's been done to them, and they speak in these simple, broken phrases to really emphasize that. There is kind of a sweet spot you'd have to hit when trying to adapt this comic, because it's a pretty violent book, which is what makes the emotions of the story that much stronger. So if you go too cutesy with it, you're going to lose a lot of its bite, but if you go too dark, then it might get too intense for the average viewer. But luckily for us, or I guess I could say unluckily, that's James Gunn's specialty, baby. Honestly, I haven't watched Guardians 3 since it came out because I don't know if I want to go through that again. Although I did just see Sheep Detectives, so I might be a bit of a masochist. That movie's very good though. Technically, this is part of DC's Vertigo line and not the main continuity. And because it's so much of its own thing, and Frank Quitely's panel work is outstanding, and it's the kind of thing that only comics can really do, I was debating whether or not to even include it here. I don't want it to seem like I think comics only exist to get adapted, which is a take that I've seen a lot recently, and hopefully everything else about the channel makes it very clear that that's not what I mean when I make these kinds of videos. But at the same time, that's kind of why I think it belongs here, to showcase exactly how much comics are capable of. And because it's so much of its own thing, it could easily fit into the DCU as a one-off movie and give a spotlight to how special this journey is to as many people as possible. Like, it's literally a Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely book where horrible things happen to animals. That's like 2 of James Gunn's favorite things. This feels like a no-brainer. The next book is The Flash, The Dastardly Death of the Rogues by Jeff Johns and Francis Manapul from 2010. Okay, technically this wasn't a miniseries or a graphic novel when it released, and it was part of the mainline Flash ongoing, but literally immediately after this arc, they did Flashpoint and rebooted the whole universe with this thing called The New 52. Maybe you've heard of it. So honestly, it's just a miniseries. Well, let's just count it as a miniseries, okay? The book follows Barry Allen as he returns to Central City, where he discovers the dead body of one of his rogues, Mirror Master. He uses his forensic skills to investigate the murder, and he realizes that this isn't one of the rogues at all, but instead a member of the Renegades, a police force from the 25th century that modeled themselves after the rogues. The Renegades travel back in time and they arrest Barry for the murder of their partner. So now he has to prove his innocence to this police force who thinks the case is already closed, while also protecting his other villains from being targeted next. Now, I am usually a Wally West for the DCU kind of guy. It's just easier for everybody. But I do love Barry Allen when he's written a specific way. And Jeff Johns, say whatever you want about the guy, he's very good at writing Barry Allen. And this story specifically really leans into Barry's strengths. Not just because the crazy Silver Age time travel stuff with Barry being on trial for a crime that hasn't happened yet, but also the mystery and the forensic angle that only Barry could really shine with. The DCEU Flash was a mess for a lot of reasons, and I mean a lot of reasons, but I think one of the biggest was that he never had a normal solo movie. After so many years of development, the solo Flash movie was a franchise-wide, multiverse-shattering flashpoint, and we never actually got a real feel for the character. And despite all the time travel shenanigans, Dastardly Death of the Rogues is somehow a smaller and simpler premise to understand. Not to mention the rogues are such an important part of the Flash mythos that hugely define the character. He has such a specific and interesting relationship with them, a handshake deal that he'll go easy on them so long as they don't hurt or kill civilians, and it's what was sorely missing from the Flash in the DCEU and even the CW. So I really need the DCU to put the rogues at a forefront, which is why the next book is Rogues by Joshua Williamson and Leo Max from 2022. The book is set in the future and follows the rogues 10 years after they disband. The gang is older, broke, washed up, their lives just straight up suck. So Captain Cold decides to get the band back together for one last job, robbing the world's biggest stash of untraceable gold in Gorilla City. I don't know if you noticed this, but DC for the longest time has tried pushing their villains as their like big brand. For decades, they've always been trying to put them at like the forefront. There was even an entire Lego game about them, which that game rips, by the way. They made a Lego game so good they had to completely rework the formula for every game after. So much more than Marvel, DC villains has essentially become a brand in its own right, sometimes even more than the heroes, which makes it even weirder that the Flash rogues have been completely ignored. I did just watch Ocean's 11, so I might be riding that heist movie high, but this is the kind of genre movie that's so easy to understand. In the same way that Clayface is a body horror movie that just so happens to be about the Batman villain, Rogues could be a Soderbergh-esque heist movie that just so happens to be about guys named Captain Cold and Weather Wizard. It could also showcase one of the things that's the most exciting to me about the DCU's direction, and that's the timeline. When James Gunn first came on as the head of DC, he said that he was approaching the universe more like Star Wars than Marvel. And for a while, nobody really understood what he meant, but now as the timeline has been getting filled out more, it's making more and more sense to me. For the most part, with a couple of exceptions, the MCU went about their timeline in a mostly linear way, whereas Star Wars jumps around the timeline to different periods however it wants. It's more obvious with Star Wars because they have very specific eras like the Clone Wars and the Rebellion and even the High Republic, but the idea seems to be the same for the DCU. So this could really open the door to go even further with it, to have movies set in the distant future that are still technically within the canon of the DCU, but so disjointed and standalone that it doesn't really matter. And then we could maybe get movies about Batman Beyond or Wonder Woman Dead Earth without affecting the current versions of those characters. The next comic is Far Sector by N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell from 2019. The book follows Sojourner Joe Mullen, a rookie Green Lantern who's assigned to the city Enduring, a massive intergalactic metropolis at the very edge of the Guardians' jurisdiction. She's sent there to investigate the city's first murder in 500 years, a piece which was only possible because the city stripped all emotion and feeling from its citizens. Now, HBO's Lanterns is making a lot of hubbub right now, especially because a new trailer came out last week, mainly for the grounded, more true detective approach that they're taking with these fantastical space characters, which funnily enough, Far Sector tackles a lot of the same things that the show looks like it's doing. I have kind of complicated thoughts on the whole thing. The new trailer does look like a big improvement over the first one, but I'm waiting for the show to come out before I really talk about it and like have an actual opinion. That costume's rough though, I'm not gonna lie. But in theory, the story of Far Sector could kind of be an answer to all this backlash. We could have our gritty, true detective mystery on HBO set on Earth, and then a Far Sector movie could explore these deep reaches of space, really go all in with the alien and creature designs like the new Mandalorian movie, but maybe like with an actual story this time would be good. Or honestly, because of Jamal Campbell's gorgeous art direction and colors, it might even benefit from being animated, like a Spider-Verse or K-pop Demon Hunters kind of thing, to really bring these creature designs and sci-fi landscapes to life in a way that live action just can't, which would also make it stand apart from the HBO show even more. Because as much as I'm still interested in Lanterns, what that show's going for, I still hope that we can see some of the classic space adventure sci-fi stuff that makes the Green Lantern mythos so special. The next book that should get adapted into the DCU is Resurrection Man Quantum Karma by Ram V and Anand R.K. from 2025. Yeah, we got 2 Ram V books in one video. There's a very simple reason for that. It's because he's a fucking goat, baby. I love that guy. For those who don't know, Resurrection Man is Mitch Shelley, a 90s era character created by Dan Abnett, Andy Lanning, and Jackson Geiss. And the idea behind him is that whenever he dies, he's brought back to life and has a different superpower that relates to how he died. So if he falls off a building, he gets the power to fly. If he's electrocuted, he gets electric powers. No matter how he dies, in his next life, he can beat it. His powers ranging from completely harmless to full-on Justice League level threats. And what Quantum Karma explores is what would happen to Mitch if he lived a long and happy life and died of old age. If he was essentially killed by time. How do you beat that in your next life? Mitch is essentially turned into a god of time who exists outside of one lifespan and can move through different points in time, different deaths, and different versions of himself. And now he's pulled into this cosmic fight against a monster with twisted versions of the same resurrection powers that he has, and he's forced to face the consequences of all the lives he's lived. This is a much weirder and more high concept book than something like Aquaman Andromeda, which even then, that was pretty high concept. Ram V is always really good at taking these big cosmic ideas and saying something deeply philosophical with them, and they're ideas that may or may not translate directly into a different medium, but the sheer concept of Resurrection Man alone and the direction that this book takes him in is so imaginative and interesting that it could be such a unique project within the more traditional DCU. You could have one actor playing Mitch across different lives and genres and points in history, more in line with something like Benjamin Button or Cloud Atlas than your standard superhero fare. The next book is Shazam, The Monster Society of Evil from 2007, written and illustrated by Jeff Smith. You might know Smith from his other work on his original series Bone, which I talked about in my last Indie Comics video. The book is a 4-issue miniseries retelling the original Golden Age Shazam origin, with an orphan Billy Batson living homeless on the street before he gets granted the power of Captain Marvel. He gets pulled into this adventure involving Mr. Mind, Dr. Savannah, and eventually Mary Marvel. It's still a superhero origin story, but it feels more like a children's fantasy adventure instead of big but superhero. Because one of the things that's really interesting about this book is how it handles Billy and Captain Marvel. This book takes more inspiration from the original Golden Age Fawcett comics. The idea that Billy says a magic word and just becomes an adult version of himself with his childlike personality and all is actually a relatively recent addition. Originally, the comics framed them as 2 separate entities, with the Captain still technically technically being the older version of Billy, but having kind of a mind of his own and taking over Billy completely when called upon, and even wanting what's best for Billy, almost kind of like a father figure, but without losing that classic Captain Marvel silliness. Like, honestly, it gives him more agency, and like the whole wisdom of Solomon thing makes more sense. I think I kind of like Golden Age Shazam more. It felt more like a fairy tale than what we're used to with the modern interpretation, and it kind of makes sense that Captain Marvel was seen as like the Superman equivalent over at Fossa. And it's a really interesting difference that I think could help this version of Shazam stand out from the previous iteration. I really love the first Shazam movie from the DCEU. The second movie, you know, maybe not so much, but I think the biggest pitfall was that the concept of Shazam is essentially impossible to do long-term in live action just because of, you know, this little thing called the passage of time. Over the course of literally one movie, Asher Angel went from sweet little kid Billy Batson into full-grown adult. I genuinely expected Fury of the Gods to end with Billy calling upon the powers of the wizard and not physically changing his appearance to showcase how much he'd changed, just like Mary Marvel. So I think the format of animation could be a way to still keep the big cheese that is Captain Marvel a staple of the new DCU. Smith's style already feels like a perfect fit for an animated movie that leans into the ideas that weren't explored in the live action movies. Maybe we could get a Black Adam that is actually a Shazam villain instead of a weird ego trip for Dwayne Johnson. Imagine that. But oh, the hierarchy of power in the DC universe really fucking changed there. The next book that should get adapted into the DCU is Green Arrow Year One by Andy Diggle and Jock from 2007. This book follows Oliver Queen, the billionaire playboy who shipwrecks his yacht on a deserted island. He builds a bow and arrow and learns how to survive on his own before discovering that the island isn't actually deserted. It's the hub of an opium ring using slave labor. So he has to liberate the camps and take down the ring with nothing more than a makeshift bow and arrow that he made out of literal garbage. It's your classic castaway survival story, especially with Oliver's journey from silver spoon asshole into genuine hero for the people, and it's packaged in a way that works really well as a standalone or leading into other Green Arrow stories. The only problem with it, and it's something that I touched on in my giant Green Arrow trilogy pitch, is that because it takes place exclusively on the island, it doesn't really showcase Oliver's time as actual Green Arrow and all the iconography and supporting characters of that. And so I think what might be neat is to merge it with the other most notable Green Arrow origin story, and that's Green Arrow The Wonder Year by Mike Grell from 1993. This book follows Oliver in the 1970s, returning to Star City after his time on the island, as he starts to shape the idea of what Green Arrow is. At first, he accidentally saves a politician while wearing a Halloween costume, but he soon gets wrapped up in a whole assassination conspiracy involving one of his old lovers. It couldn't really be as much of a direct adaptation as some of the others on this list, trying to fuse these two stories together, especially because of the time period that Wonder Year takes place in and the contradiction between the two books. But you could either do his island origin stuff in the first half and then the city stuff in the second half, sort of like how Raimi Spider-Man does it, like how that movie, the first half is the origin and the second half is goblin stuff, or you could intercut between the two ideas with flashbacks like the CW did. I don't really need every character to get an origin story. In fact, I think it's more fun when they don't, but I think if handled right, it could sort of end up being the definitive Green Arrow origin and allow him to have a real place in the universe. Also, if you're wondering what I think about Absolute Green Arrow, hell yeah. Hell yeah, baby. That's all I gotta say is hell yeah. And the final book that I think deserves to get adapted into a DCU movie is Wonder Woman The Hikatea by Greg Rucka and J.G. Jones from 2002. Wonder Woman is genuinely the most important character for this new DCU to get right. If they screw up Batman, you know, whatever. We got a bunch of other guys who can fill that spot. But Wonder Woman, after, you know,
I need you to give me the stone. What happened to it?
We really gotta do her justice. And Greg Rucka's time on the character, which began with this 90-page graphic novel, is easily the best of the best for the character. Seriously, before I read this book, I liked Diana. You know, I always appreciated her and respected her for what she represented for comic history and, you know, the first woman superhero. But then after reading Hikatea and the rest of his 2003 Wonder Woman run, she became top 5 superheroes of all time for me. Like, genuinely, I fucking love this character now. The book opens with Diana explaining something called the Hikatea, which was a real-life tradition in ancient Greece. It's a sacred ritual where someone asks for protection and becomes bound to their protector. It's an oath that's binding, and if one were to break their word, they would be punished for it by the gods. One night, a girl named Danielle arrives at the doorsteps of the Themysciran embassy, looking for Wonder Woman. She evokes the Hikatea to Diana, and without question, Diana accepts it and grants her protection. At first, we don't know who or what she needs protection from, but soon, someone arrives on Diana's door. Batman, looking for Danielle. Bruce says that Danielle killed several men in Gotham and he's been tracking her down to bring her in. But Diana stands firm and protects Danielle. She had her own justifiable reasons for what she did. Plus, even if she wanted to go back on her word, she literally couldn't. And now Diana is in this impossible situation on opposite sides of an ideological debate with one of her closest friends. I was trying to figure out a pick for Batman in this list because God knows we got so many Batman books to pull from. But because it seems like the DCU's Brave and the Bold is going to be a very specific era for the character, later into his career with Damian Wayne as Robin, I figured that something like this could be a little bit more interesting, to use him and his no-kill rule that we all understand so much as a foil to what Diana stands for. It's the kind of moral dilemma that really lends itself to a movie, not just because we get to see Batman get his shit rocked, which, you know, always love that, but because it really puts to a forefront what makes Diana special, and that's her kindness. She accepts this binding contract of protection over this girl she's never never even met, with no reasoning or explanation needed, just because she asked. I don't even think Superman would put himself in that position. A lot of the things that we understand as Superman and his kindness really come from Wonder Woman first. It's a story that's instantly understandable and showcases what I believe to be the core, most important element of Wonder Woman's character. Everybody always wants to paint her as a warrior or a fighter, but most of all, Diana is a friend who stays true to her word no matter what. The single most often question that I get when it comes to comics is the famous "where do I start" dilemma. And I will always say the same thing. With comics, you can start wherever you want, at any number 1, or any changing of a writer, or the start of a new arc, or honestly any random issue if you're brave enough. It's part of the magic of comics. You can pick up, start reading, and eventually things will all make sense. But I understand that that can still be a little bit daunting, especially for a completely new reader, which is why the miniseries and the graphic novel has been so huge lately, and why it's seemingly been such a big focus at DC. Not just because they can be adapted into movies, although I'm sure that's a big part of it, but because they're so easy for new readers to pick up. You can walk into a bookstore, not just a comic store, but a bookstore like a Barnes & Noble, pick up Green Arrow Year 1 or Zatanna Bring Down the House or any of the DC Compact line, which has been fantastic, and you'll know you have a solid, complete story. And that's so much more approachable and less daunting compared to an ongoing. There's no question on where to start or what do I need to know. You just pick it up and you start reading it. And from the looks of things, with how Supergirl is getting people interested in the world of comics with Woman of Tomorrow, and even how James Gunn's Superman began right in the middle of the action, like you were picking up a random issue of Action Comics, it seems like where to start is becoming less and less of a barrier to entry, because that, above all else, should be the main goal from James Gunn and the DCU. More than just box office returns or finding the next story to turn into a movie, but allowing as many people as possible to start reading comics, and in turn fall in love with these characters and their stories. But what are some miniseries and graphic novels that you think should get adapted in the DCU? Do you think that direct adaptations even have a place in comic book movies? If you like this video, be sure to the like button and subscribe. I really like doing these kind of comic recommendations videos, so if you like this, let me know down below. Special thanks to Jacket361, Preston Lim 5662, Dr. Whammo, Liam Lawrence, Spectacular Clyde 259, Lupin the Maelstrom, E. Ryan W 6884, Brainiac Jack, Geeks Knowledge, and Randy McCarl for joining the spectacular tier of my Patreon and channel members. This has been TroyBoy17 coming at you live. Be responsible, and I'll see you around.